He locked me out in the storm with nothing but a nightgown. But he didn't realize he'd just given me the key to his destruction. The click of the deadbolt was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was sharper than the shouting that had preceded it, more final than the slam of the heavy oak door that sent a tremor through the porch steps beneath my bare feet. For a moment I didn't move. I just stood there, staring at the polished wood grain, half expecting it to swing back open. I thought I'd hear Mark's voice, angry but maybe with a sliver of regret, telling me to stop being so dramatic and get back inside. But the only sound was the relentless drumming of rain on the roof, on the perfectly manicured lawn, on my own skin. The thin silk of my nightgown was already soaked through, clinging to me like a second, icy skin. The balmy summer night had turned into a furious downpour, and the wind whipped the cold rain into my face, plastering strands of my hair across my cheeks and into my eyes. I was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shudder that started in my bones and worked its way out. It wasn't just the cold. It was the shock, the adrenaline bleeding out of me and leaving a hollow, terrifying void. One moment I was in my home, in the middle of a fight, and the next, I was outside, exiled, with nothing. Not my phone, not my wallet, not even a pair of shoes. The fight had started, as they always did, over something small that was actually something huge. It was about a bank statement. A statement for an account Mark didn't know about. It wasn't much, just a few $1,000s I'd painstakingly saved over 2 years, skimming a little here and there from the grocery budget, selling a few of my old art pieces online. It was my escape fund, my just-in-case fund. Because with Mark, you always needed a just-in-case. He'd found it tucked into the back of a cookbook. His face, when he'd confronted me, was a mask of cold fury. "What is this, Clara?" he'd asked, his voice deceptively calm. He waved the piece of paper like a verdict. "It's just some savings, Mark," I'd said, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. "Savings? You have a joint account. You have credit cards. I give you everything you could possibly need. So I'll ask you again. What is this?" "It's for me. For an emergency." His laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. "An emergency? Or were you planning on running away? Were you planning on taking my money and leaving me?" "It's not your money. I saved it." My voice was rising, cracking with the injustice of it all. The life I lived was funded by his family's wealth, true, but I wasn't a prisoner. Or so I had thought. I wanted something that was just mine. That's when he'd exploded. The calm facade shattered, and the man I was so terrified of emerged. He called me ungrateful, a leech, a pathetic little gold digger who would be nothing without him. He said I'd tricked him into marrying me, that I was just waiting for the chance to betray him. Each word was a calculated blow, designed to break me down, to make me feel worthless and small. And for years it had worked. But tonight, something inside me had snapped. "I am not nothing," I screamed back, tears of rage and frustration streaming down my face. "I gave up my career for you. I moved across the country for you. I have tried to build a life with you, but you won't let me have anything of my own. Not a friend you haven't approved, not a hobby you don't belittle, and not even a single dollar you don't control. That was my mistake. The final, unforgivable truth." His eyes went black with rage. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep like claws. "You want something of your own?" he snarled, dragging me towards the front door. "Fine. You can have the whole damn world to yourself." He'd fumbled with the locks, his hands shaking with fury, and then he'd shoved me out into the raging storm. Now, standing on the curb, the manicured perfection of our suburban street looked alien and hostile. The warm, glowing windows of the neighboring houses were like portraits of lives I could no longer access. I was an outcast. Where could I go? My family lived 5 states away. My closest friends, the ones Mark had systematically pushed out of my life, probably wouldn't even recognize my number if I managed to borrow a phone. I could already hear Mark's version of the story. His hysterical wife having a complete meltdown, storming out of the house in the middle of the night. He was so good at playing the victim, the long-suffering husband. A car turned onto our street, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain like twin spotlights. They swept over me, and I flinched, instinctively trying to cover myself with my arms. I must have looked like a ghost or some crazed woman escaped from an asylum. I stumbled back, hoping the driver would just keep going, that they wouldn't see the pathetic, shivering creature on the side of the road. But the car slowed. It was a large, black SUV, the kind that drinks gas and radiates quiet power. It was sleek and spotless, the rain beating on its waxed finish. It didn't belong in our neighborhood of sensible family sedans and minivans. It pulled up silently, its engine a low, almost imperceptible hum, and stopped directly beside me. My heart hammered in my chest. Was it Mark? Had he come to his senses? Was he going to drag me back inside and spend the next week punishing me for my outburst? Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through me. Couldn't go back. Not after this. I took a step away from the vehicle, ready to run, though I had no idea where I would go. The tinted rear window slid down with a faint, electric whir. I held my breath, bracing myself for Mark's face, contorted with rage. But it wasn't him. The face that looked out at me was familiar, but in a way that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was a face I had only seen a handful of times, at holidays and uncomfortable family dinners. A face that was older than Mark's, with sharper angles, and eyes that were a colder, more calculating shade of blue. They looked at me now, taking in my drenched nightgown, my bare feet, my trembling frame, with an unnerving, unreadable expression. Then, a low, calm voice cut through the sound of the storm, a voice that held none of my husband's volatile anger, but something far more intimidating. "Clara?" said Julian, Mark's estranged, formidable older brother. "Get in the car. We need to talk about my brother." For a long moment I was paralyzed. The rain-slicked asphalt felt like a different planet, and Julian's face in the window was an alien moon. Julian. Mark never spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a vitriol that was shocking even for my husband. He was the family pariah, the older brother who had been all but disowned after some catastrophic falling out with their father years ago. I'd met him maybe 3 times, and each encounter was brief and charged with an unspoken tension that made my skin crawl. He was everything Mark wasn't: quiet, observant, and possessing a stillness that felt more like a coiled snake than a calm man. "Get in," he said again, his voice flat, emotionless. It wasn't a suggestion. My survival instincts screamed at me to run. Mark hated Julian. Getting into a car with this man felt like a profound betrayal, a leap from a crumbling cliff into an unknown, black ocean. But the alternative was this: standing in the storm, waiting for pneumonia or for Mark to drag me back inside for a punishment I couldn't even begin to imagine. My trembling had become convulsive. My teeth were chattering so hard my jaw ached. Taking a ragged breath, I stumbled forward and pulled the heavy car door open. The inside of the SUV was like a different world. The roar of the storm was instantly muffled, reduced to a distant, muted drumming. The air was warm and smelled faintly of leather and something clean, like cedar. I slid onto the plush leather seat, my soaking nightgown leaving a dark stain. The door clicked shut, sealing me inside the silent, warm capsule. Julian didn't say anything. He just reached into the back and produced a thick, cashmere blanket, dropping it into my lap. It was impossibly soft. I wrapped it around my shoulders, my numb fingers fumbling with the fabric. The warmth was so immediate, so comforting, it made me want to weep. The car began to move, pulling away from the curb with a smooth, silent grace. I watched my house, Mark's house, recede in the side mirror, its welcoming lights looking like a cruel taunt. I didn't dare look at Julian, keeping my eyes fixed on my own reflection in the dark window. A pale, terrified woman with seaweed hair and wide, haunted eyes stared back at me. "How did you know?" I finally whispered, my voice hoarse. "How did you know to be here?" He drove for a few seconds before answering, his movements economical and precise. "Mark called me," he said, and the simple statement sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "What?" "No, he wouldn't. He hates you." A dry, mirthless sound, not quite a laugh, escaped his lips. "Oh, he hates me. But his ego is bigger than his hatred. He called to gloat. He was drunk, proud of himself. Said he'd finally taught his gold-digging wife her place. Julian's voice remained perfectly level, but I could hear the razor's edge beneath the words. He recited Mark's insults with a chilling accuracy that made my stomach churn. He said he'd thrown you out with nothing but the clothes on your back. He found it very amusing. The humiliation was a physical blow. It was one thing to be thrown out in a fit of rage. It was another thing entirely for Mark to have picked up the phone immediately afterward, not to call a friend, but to call his most bitter rival, to brag about it like a schoolyard bully who just won a fight. He hadn't just wanted to punish me. He had wanted an audience for my degradation. The tears that I had been holding back finally came, silent and hot, trailing down my cold cheeks. I pulled the blanket tighter, hiding my face in the soft wool. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. The pristine suburban streets gave way to the glittering, rain-streaked highways circling the city. I had no idea where we were going, and I found I didn't have the energy to care. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean by shame and cold. Julian didn't press me to talk. He just drove, his presence a steady, intimidating weight in the seat beside me. He seemed to understand that words were useless right now. Eventually, the hum of the engine and the warmth of the car began to lull me into a state of sheer exhaustion. My shivering subsided, replaced by a deep, bone-weary ache. I must have drifted off because I was startled when the car slowed, turning off the highway and onto a quieter, darker road. We were heading into the heart of the city, towards the towering steel and glass buildings of the financial district, all dark and empty at this hour. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep and unshed tears. "To a place he won't think to look," Julian said simply. He pulled the SUV into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, modern skyscraper. The gates slid shut behind us, locking us in the silent, concrete tomb. He parked in a reserved spot, the engine dying with a soft sigh, plunging us into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the dashboard. He turned to look at me then, and in the dim light, his eyes seemed to burn with a cold, intense fire. "You need to listen to me very carefully, Clara," he said, his voice low and serious. "Mark thinks this is over. He thinks he's won. He'll let you suffer for a day or two, and then he'll expect you to come crawling back, begging for his forgiveness. That's his pattern. That's his game." I just nodded, unable to speak. He was right. That's exactly what would happen. "But that's not going to happen this time," Julian continued, his gaze unwavering. "This time is going to be different. He made a mistake tonight, not just by throwing you out. He made a mistake by calling me." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between us. "He took something from me a long time ago, Clara. Something I can never get back. He destroyed my relationship with my father and pushed me out of my own family, my own company. And I have been waiting for years for the perfect opportunity to collect that debt." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hair on my arms stand on end. "And you, Clara, you are the key. You're not just his wife. You're his greatest weakness. He has no idea what you know, what you've seen living in that house. I'm going to help you, yes. I'm going to give you a safe place to stay, clothes, money, the best lawyer's money can buy. But in return, you're going to help me burn his whole world to the ground." The words hung in the sterile air of the garage, thick with the scent of concrete and cold metal. Burn his whole world to the ground. It wasn't a metaphor. I could hear it in Julian's voice, see it in the chilling intensity of his eyes. This wasn't just about a sibling rivalry. This was about scorched earth vengeance. And he wanted to hand me the match. I can't," I stammered, shaking my head. The blanket suddenly felt suffocating. "Mark is. You don't understand how he is. He's vindictive. He'd destroy me. He'd make sure I never work again. He'd lie to my family. He'd do all of that anyway." Julian cut in, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Do you honestly believe if you go back to him, this won't happen again? Do you think he'll ever trust you?" ever see you as anything more than a possession he can control? He crossed a line tonight, Clara. A line he can't uncross. The only difference is now you have a choice. You can go back and be his victim for the rest of your life, or you can stand with me and take back everything he's ever taken from you and more. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and a tiny, flickering ember of something I hadn't felt in years. Rage. Real, white-hot rage. Julian was right. Mark wouldn't just forgive and forget. He would hold this over my head forever. Every argument, every disagreement would end with the threat of the curb, the rain, the cold. My escape fund would become the ultimate proof of my treachery, justifying his every controlling impulse. I would live my life on a leash so short I wouldn't even be able to breathe without his permission. What did he take from you? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to understand the depth of this feud. Julian looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. He stared out the windshield at the blank concrete wall. Our father's company was built on a partnership. My ideas, his money. I was the heir apparent, the one who was supposed to take over. Mark was Mark, the screw-up, the disappointment. But he was charming, and he was ruthless. He found a vulnerability, a mistake I made in my personal life, and he twisted it. He poisoned our father against me, convinced him I was a liability, unstable. He framed me for a financial scandal he orchestrated himself. By the time the dust settled, my father had written me out of his will, out of the company, out of his life. Mark got everything, and my father died believing his youngest son was a saint and his eldest was a snake. The story settled over me like a shroud. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about love, family, and the ultimate betrayal. I finally understood the cold fire in Julian's eyes. It was the fire of a man who had lost everything and had spent a decade forging his anger into a weapon. I have my own money now, Julian said, his voice regaining its composure. I've built my own empire from the ashes Mark left me in. But that's not enough. I want restitution. I want our father's legacy, the company I was meant to lead, back. And to do that, I need to expose Mark for the fraud he is. And you, Clara, have been living inside his fortress for 5 years. You know where the cracks are. He was asking me to be a spy, a Trojan horse in reverse. The thought was terrifying, but it was also electrifying. The idea of Mark, so smug and untouchable, finally facing a consequence. The idea of him being held accountable for his cruelty, not just to me, but to his own brother. A strange sense of loyalty, not to the man I married but to the justice he deserved, began to take root in the desolate landscape of my heart. Okay, I said, the word coming out firmer than I expected. What do you need me to do? A slow, satisfied smile touched the corners of Julian's lips for the first time. It transformed his face, making him look less like a predator and more like a brilliant strategist whose final chess piece had just fallen into place. For now, we get you warm and safe. He led me from the car to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. It was the antithesis of the opulent, cluttered mansion I shared with Mark. This place was minimalist, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire sleeping city. It was beautiful, but cold and impersonal, more like a high-end hotel suite than a home. He showed me to a guest suite that was larger than my first apartment, complete with a closet stocked with new clothes in my size. Jeans, sweaters, coats, all with the tags still on. How did you? I started to ask, bewildered. I've been planning this for a long time, Clara, he said, his expression unreadable. I've been waiting for Mark to self-destruct. I just didn't know you would be the catalyst. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we plan your return. My return? I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. What do you mean, my return? I'm not going back there. Ever. Julian turned, his face serious. You have to, at least for a little while. That's the only way this works. Like I said, he'll expect you to come crawling back. You'll play the part of the repentant wife. You'll apologize, you'll cry, you'll let him feel like he's won. You'll destroy that secret bank account and tell him he was right, that you were being foolish. You will lull him into a false sense of security. And while you're there, you'll find what I need." My blood ran cold. And what is that? Mark is careless with his paperwork. He's arrogant. He believes no one would ever dare to look too closely. I need access to his study, specifically to the files in his personal safe. He keeps 2 sets of books for the company, one for the IRS and one for himself. The real one is in that safe. Get me that, Clara, and I promise you, you will walk away from this with a life he could never touch. The thought of facing Mark again, of pretending to be broken and subservient, made me physically ill. But the thought of finding that evidence, of holding the key to his destruction in my hands, it was a siren's call. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning in the luxurious bed, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling. I drifted between nightmares of Mark's rage and exhilarating daydreams of his downfall. The next morning, dressed in new clothes, with a burner phone Julian had provided, I followed his plan. I called Mark. He didn't answer the first 3 times. The 4th time he picked up, his voice thick with sleep and irritation. "What?" he grunted. "Mark? It's me?" I whispered, injecting as much pathetic remorse into my voice as I could muster. "I'm so sorry. You were right. I was wrong. I'm cold and I'm scared. Can I please come home?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I pictured him in our bed, a smug, satisfied smirk spreading across his face. "Stay where you are," he finally said, his tone dripping with condescending authority. "I'll come get you. And Clara, we have a lot to talk about." An hour later, I was standing on a street corner downtown when Mark's Mercedes pulled up. He didn't get out. He just unlocked the passenger door. When I got in, he didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Get in. We're not going home," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We're going to see my father's lawyers. I'm having the postnup amended. From now on, you get nothing. You'll sign it, or I'll file for divorce and make sure every single person we know hears about your little secret bank account and how you tried to rob me blind." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes cold and devoid of any affection. "This is your only chance to save this marriage, Clara. Don't screw it up." My heart plummeted into my stomach, a dead weight of ice and dread. Postnup. Of course. It was the perfect Mark-style punishment. Not just emotional subjugation, but financial annihilation. He wanted to legally erase me, to ensure that if I ever got the courage to leave again, I would do so with less than I had the night he threw me out. Julian hadn't prepared me for this. This was an escalation I hadn't seen coming. My carefully constructed mask of the repentant wife nearly cracked. I wanted to scream, to claw at him, to tell him he was a monster. But Julian's voice echoed in my mind. "Let him feel like he's won." I took a shaky breath and made myself small in the passenger seat. I looked down at my hands, twisting them in my lap. "Okay, Mark," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Whatever you think is fair." My capitulation seemed to mollify him slightly. A flicker of triumph, ugly and possessive, crossed his face before he turned his attention back to the road. He thought he had me. He thought he was putting the final lock on my cage, and I was handing him the key. The drive to the lawyer's office was suffocatingly silent. I stared out the window, the city blurring past, my mind racing. Julian's plan was to get me back inside the house. Mark's new plan was a complication, but it was also, I realized with a jolt, an opportunity. A legal meeting, documents, signatures. Perhaps this was a new way in, a new vulnerability to exploit. The law firm was what you'd expect. Mahogany walls, plush carpets, and an air of quiet, expensive power. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his cold eyes, explained the document in condescendingly simple terms. It was brutal. I would waive any and all claim to any assets acquired during our marriage. Spousal support would be a non-negotiable, pitifully low lump sum, payable only if he initiated the divorce. If I left, I would get absolutely nothing. It was financial slavery codified in legalese. "Do you understand, Mrs. Hamilton?" Davies asked, sliding the document and a heavy, gold-plated pen across the polished table towards me. I looked at Mark. He was watching me, his arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. This was my penance. Signing this was the price of readmission to his kingdom. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly. I could feel both men watching my every move. I uncapped it, poised the nib over the signature line, and then I stopped. "I need to use the restroom," I said, my voice quiet but steady. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Just sign it, Clara. Don't make a scene." "I'm not," I said, meeting his gaze. I feel a little sick. Please, it will only take a minute." I let my lip tremble just enough. Davies, ever the smooth professional, interjected. "Of course, Mrs. Hamilton. Down the hall, second door on the left." I stood up on shaky legs and walked out of the conference room, feeling Mark's suspicious glare on my back the entire way. Inside the ridiculously ornate bathroom, I leaned against the marble counter, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pulled out the burner phone Julian had given me. My fingers flew across the screen, typing out a frantic message. "He's making me sign a new post-nup. I get nothing. It's a complete wipeout. At the law firm Davies, Black and Finch." Now, I stared at the screen, waiting. Seconds stretched into an eternity. What if he didn't see it? What if he had no way to counter this? Had I just walked into the final, inescapable trap? Just as I was about to lose hope, the phone buzzed. "Good. Let them see you go into the bathroom. Then sign it." Sign it? My blood ran cold. Was he insane? This would ruin me. I typed back, my thumbs clumsy with panic. "Sign it. It gives him everything. I'll have no leverage." The reply was instantaneous. "He already has everything, Clara. That document is meaningless. His real power is in the lies he's built his company on. You're not signing away your future. You're buying your way back into his house. Now sign the damn thing before he gets suspicious. And get a copy." His certainty was a lifeline. He had a plan. I didn't understand it, but I had to trust it. I took a deep breath, splashed cold water on my face, and composed myself. When I walked back into the conference room, I was the picture of defeated compliance. I sat down, picked up the pen without a word, and signed my name on every line indicated. I slid the signed pages back across the table. "I'd like a copy for my records," I said softly, looking at Mr. Davies. Mark scoffed. "What for? It's not like you can afford a lawyer to read it." But Davies, ever the professional, nodded to his assistant. "Of course. We'll have a copy made for you right away, Mrs. Hamilton." The ride home was tense. Mark seemed to be waiting for me to break down, to cry or plead, but I remained silent, staring out the window, clutching the envelope with my copy of the post-nup like it was a holy relic. When we walked back into the house, the scene of my exile just hours before, it felt different. The air was thick with my humiliation. He watched me as I walked through the foyer, his eyes raking over me. "Go upstairs and change," he ordered. "Our cleaner comes tomorrow. I want this place spotless before she gets here. You can start with the mud you tracked in last night." It was a test. He was reestablishing dominance, reminding me of my place. The old me would have flushed with shame and scurried off to do his bidding. But the new me, the one with Julian's number in a burner phone and a secret mission, saw the command for what it was: an opportunity. "Of course," I said meekly. I spent the next 2 days playing the part of the perfect, penitent wife. I cooked his favorite meals. I cleaned the house until it gleamed. I apologized profusely and endlessly. I let him lecture me, belittle me, and I absorbed it all with a counterfeit humility that seemed to satisfy his bruised ego. He started to relax around me. He'd leave his briefcase unlocked, his laptop open. He was getting comfortable. He thought he had won. On the third night, my chance came. Mark had a conference call with some overseas investors that he always took in the sunroom at the far end of the house. He'd be occupied for at least an hour. My heart pounded as I slipped into his study. The room was his sanctuary, all dark wood and leather, smelling of his expensive cologne. I went straight to the large, ornate painting behind his desk, a landscape of the Scottish Highlands. Julian had told me to look for something out of place. My eyes scanned the room, the bookshelves, the desk, the floor, and then I saw it. On the frame of the painting, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a tiny, nearly imperceptible scratch near the bottom right corner. With trembling fingers, I pressed on that spot. There was a soft click, and the entire painting swung forward, revealing the cold, gray steel of a wall safe. I almost gasped. He had told me. He had told me it would be here. My hands were slick with sweat as I reached for the dial. Julian's instructions had been precise. He'd given me a list of significant dates in Mark's life: birthdays, anniversaries, the day he'd taken over the company. Mark was arrogant and sentimental in the worst ways. I tried the first combination. Nothing. The second. Nothing. My panic began to rise. The sound of Mark's voice, faint and muffled, drifted from the sunroom. Time was running out. I took a breath and visualized the last combination Julian had given me. It wasn't a date. It was a 6-digit number. 0-8-1-4-9-2. As I turned the dial, each click sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I finished the sequence and pulled the heavy steel handle. It didn't budge. My heart sank. It was wrong. All this for nothing. Defeated, I was about to swing the painting closed when my eyes caught something else. A small, almost invisible keyhole just below the dial. A type I had never seen before, shaped like a tiny star. It wasn't a combination lock. Or at least not only a combination lock. Needed a key. A key I didn't have. A key I had no idea how to find. My mission, Julian's entire plan, had just hit a solid steel wall. And just then, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway just outside the study door. Mark's call had ended early. My blood turned to ice. The heavy painting was still swung open, the safe exposed like a guilty secret. I had seconds. My hands, slick with a fresh wave of panic, fumbled against the ornate frame. I shoved it back into place, the click of the latch sounding like a cannon blast in the silent house. I spun around just as the study door knob began to turn. There was nowhere to hide. I did the only thing I could think of. I snatched a book from the shelf, sank into Mark's oversized leather chair, and tried to make my frantic, hammering heartbeat invisible. The door swung open and Mark stood there, his phone in his hand. His eyes swept the room, a frown creasing his forehead. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I held up the book, praying my hand wasn't shaking. It was a biography of some long-dead industrialist. I just wanted something to read," I said, my voice a tight, reedy thing. I finished cleaning and I was bored. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. His gaze flickered from me to the painting behind the desk, then back to me. I was certain he could hear my heart, that he could see the sweat beating on my hairline. This was it. He knew. The game was over. Then, to my utter astonishment, he grunted and turned his attention back to his phone. "Well, don't make a mess. I'm going to bed." He walked out, pulling the door closed behind him, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence, my body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. I had escaped. Barely. I slumped in the chair, my limbs feeling like lead. A key. Julian's intel was good, but it was incomplete. I relayed the disastrous update to him on the burner phone, my fingers still shaking. "It needs a key. Star-shaped. Mission failed." The reply came a few minutes later. "Not failed. Delayed. He keeps it on him. Always. It's the one thing he would never leave in the house. Check his car keys, his suits, his gym bag. Find it, Clara. This is our only shot." The next week was the most harrowing of my life. I lived on a knife's edge, playing the part of the devoted, brainwashed wife while secretly becoming a forensic investigator in my own home. I went through the pockets of every suit he owned, my fingers brushing against expensive fabrics while he showered. I meticulously searched his gym bag, his briefcase, even the glove compartment of his car. Nothing. The key remained elusive, a ghost haunting my every move. Mark, lulled into a false sense of security by my subservience, grew more careless, more arrogant. He talked openly on the phone about deals, about moving money, about creative accounting. Assuming I was too stupid or too broken to understand, I recorded everything on the burner phone. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place. Mark had a charity gala to attend, a high-profile event where he loved to play the role of the generous philanthropist. He was preening in front of the mirror, adjusting his tuxedo, when I saw it. Attached to the chain of his ridiculously expensive platinum pocket watch, nestled amongst a few other gaudy fobs, was a small, strangely shaped piece of metal. A tiny silver star. My breath caught in my throat. It was so small, so integrated into the ostentatious piece of jewelry. I'd never noticed it before. He thought he was hiding it in plain sight. My mind raced. How could I get it? He would never take the watch off. I watched him clip it to his waistcoat, patting it smugly. That night, I feigned a migraine, begging off the gala. He was irritated but agreed, eager to go and soak up the adoration of the city's elite without his mousy, repentant wife cramping his style. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Julian. I know where it is. It's on his pocket watch. He's wearing it now. There was a pause. The St. Regis Gala, Julian said, his voice grim. Security will be tight. I can't get near him. I know, I said, a desperate, wild plan forming in my mind. But I can. I changed into the most beautiful dress I owned, a deep crimson silk gown that Mark had bought me but always said was too daring. I did my hair, my makeup. I looked at the woman in the mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a victim. I saw a soldier. I took a taxi to the St. Regis, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew Mark's table number. I slipped into the grand ballroom, a sea of glittering jewels and fake smiles. I saw him holding court, laughing, a glass of champagne in his hand. He was in his element. I walked straight towards him. Heads turned as I passed. The murmurs started. When he saw me, his smile vanished, replaced by a thunderous look of pure fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards a secluded alcove. "My headache got better," I said sweetly, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. I leaned in close, as if to whisper something intimate. "You left your watch on the nightstand." I lied, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, the one with the funny little key? I was so worried you'd lost it. I thought I should bring it to you." Confusion warred with suspicion on his face. His hand instinctively went to his waistcoat. His eyes widened slightly as he realized the watch wasn't there. For the first time in our entire marriage, I had him completely off balance. In that split second of confusion, I did what Julian and I had planned in my frantic taxi ride. "Oh, look, there's Mr. Henderson from the board," I exclaimed, pointing over his shoulder. It was an old trick, but his ego couldn't resist. He glanced back instinctively. In that instant, my fingers, nimble and quick, unclipped the watch chain from his waistcoat. I palmed the heavy watch and the precious key, my other hand already reaching into my evening bag. I pulled out a perfect replica Julian had a contact create from a photograph I'd sent. A cheap but identical pocket watch. "Oh, silly me, here it is," I said, pressing the fake into his hand. "Must have fallen on the floor." I smiled my most dazzling, empty smile. "Now go on. Don't let me keep you from your friends." I turned and walked away without a backward glance, my legs trembling but my resolve like steel. I didn't stop until I was in a taxi, the real watch and key cold and heavy in my hand. I went straight to Julian's penthouse. He was waiting. Together, we drove back to the house, now dark and empty. I opened the study, swung back the painting, and this time, when I inserted the tiny star-shaped key, the safe opened with a satisfying, heavy thud. Inside were stacks of papers, ledgers, and a single, encrypted hard drive. It was all there. The 2 sets of books, evidence of massive fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement. A web of corruption so vast it was staggering. Julian's hands were steady as he photographed every single page with his phone. When Mark came home hours later, drunk and furious, ready to tear me to shreds for my stunt at the gala. He found the house empty. The next morning, as he was nursing his hangover, the news broke. An anonymous tip to the SEC and the IRS. A massive data leak. His company's stock plummeted. Federal agents were at his door before he'd even had his first cup of coffee. I watched it all unfold from the safety of Julian's penthouse. I saw Mark, haggard and stunned, being led away in handcuffs. I saw the empire he'd stolen crumble into dust. Julian, true to his word, took care of everything. His lawyers filed for my divorce, citing the postnup I'd signed under duress, backed by recordings of Mark's abuse. With the mountain of criminal evidence against him, Mark had no fight left in him. The postnup was voided. I was granted a divorce and a settlement that ensured I would never have to depend on anyone ever again. Julian eventually took over the salvaged remains of his father's company, rebuilding it from the ground up, this time on a foundation of integrity. He offered me a job, but I politely declined. I bought a small studio apartment downtown, overlooking a park. I started painting again, not for an escape fund, but for the sheer joy of it. Sometimes, when the rain falls, I think of that night on the curb, trembling and alone. I don't feel the cold or the fear anymore. I feel the click of the safe opening, the weight of the key in my hand, and the astonishing, exhilarating power of a woman who decided to stop being a victim and burn down her own cage.